Bueno, pues ahora vamos a platicar sobre el periodismo. Y para empezar, pues tenemos un panel maravilloso que vamos a compartir sus experiencias, sus conocimientos. En este encuentro ya hemos hablado mucho del papel del periodismo en la construcción de la democracia y también de las amenazas que representa el autoritarismo para las personas periodistas en todos nuestros países. Entonces ya ha sido un tema y en este espacio vamos a concentrarnos en este papel y en cómo contribuye el periodismo a la construcción de democracias. Para empezar, no tenemos una persona de los Estados Unidos que pensamos que iba a ser importante por lo que está pasando allá. Entonces, me pidieron que dijera unas palabras muy rápido sobre lo que está pasando bajo el gobierno de Trump en términos de la libertad de expresión, porque la verdad es que realmente es impactante. Y también tenemos que tomar en cuenta que cuando hablamos de las transformaciones que está haciendo el gobierno de Donald Trump en los Estados Unidos, hemos hablado que pues, no es solo Trump, que hay un sistema que tiene una historia, pero también que estamos viendo cosas inéditas. Y también que no solo es Trump en ese momento, sino que está vinculado a una ultraderecha internacional que ha tenido pensado esta transformación, estas medidas, imposición de un modelo autoritario desde hace muchos años. Lo van trabajando. Entonces hay que pensar un poco en que lo que está pasando en los Estados Unidos podría ser un modelo para nuestros países también. Una cosa que me impactó mucho es que con la prohibición de la diversidad, de la inclusión, estos programas en los Estados Unidos y la guerra que han lanzado contra el progresismo o lo que ellos les gusta llamar el wokeismo en los Estados Unidos. Hay una serie de palabras que ahora las organizaciones están quitando de todo lo que publican porque les pueden poner como blancos de la política represiva de Donald Trump. Mira, ¿qué son esas palabras? O sea, que incluyen activistas, racismo, antirracismo, crisis climática, género en todas sus formas, gender, trans, por supuesto, LGBTQ, diversidad, la palabra diversidad, opresión, Native American, o sea que indígena de allá, black, negro, discriminación, incluye la palabra mujeres y una serie de cosas que literal las agencias están borrando de sus publicaciones porque no quieren ser llamar la atención de esta política represiva. Pues eso es nuestro lenguaje. Estas son nuestras identidades. Entonces, en este sentido de las palabras que se borran, el intento es muy claro, es borrar a nosotras y nosotros de la sociedad y sobre todo de la política también. El otro es que hace 2 días cerraron el financiamiento federal a la radio pública y a la televisión pública. Entonces están controlando lo que se puede decir y también controlando y reduciendo muchísimo los espacios en que podemos decirlo. Bueno, con ese contexto quiero pasar por, no voy a profundizar más, porque además Miguel, una de las personas que está aquí en el panel, va a hablar un poco más sobre el impacto de Trump en la región. Entonces vamos a empezar contigo, Miguel. Miguel Montes Camacho es comunicador social y magíster en desarrollo y cultura con 15 años de experiencia en periodismo y comunicación. Actualmente es director de programas de la Fundación Gabo, que muchos ya conocen, donde impulsa iniciativas en defensa del periodismo independiente, la ética informativa y la participación ciudadana. for civil participation. He has led strategies for patrimonial communication and innovative cultural projects with media, international organizations, and public administration in Latin America. Welcome, Miguel. Many thanks, Laura. Many thanks to everyone for being here. I come from a small city, it is Cartagena, where the Gabo Foundation is based, which is an organization that from 3 years ago, we have been now 3 years, and they have been working to boost journalism to get, and this has been the work that we have been doing for the last 3 years, and this has been an organization created by the Nobel Prize Garcia Marquez, who had the dream of that from Ibero-America we can exercise and practice the best journalism in the world. In that matter, I would like to point that, and with this context that Laura gave, that, and I want to refer to the closest context. There has been an impact, a very strong impact on the media for Latin America, specifically due to the suspension of funds by USAID. There are many orphans of USAID from the media sector, particularly those who have seen reduce its budget between 20 and 40% due to this suspension of funding, and this, of course, it will impact the exercise of the journalism in the region. Many journalists team of media, very important in the region, have had to reduce their working teams, to fire people because of this reduction of funds. And out of this, we see the effect, the immediate effect of the measures taken starting January 27th of this year, when several organizations of civil society were notified of the funding suspension, and this has had an impact on the execution of programs that were made. And of course, this results in an opportunity to explore alternates out of sustainability, alternate routes on collaboration among organizations, among actors of civil society. And while we walk that road, of course, we're gonna generate instability, specifically in the journalism sector, where this goes far beyond what we see as an audience, and this is in the protection and the security for journalism and the life of journalism. These are at stake in several countries, and they are under authoritarian regimes. This is a fact. It is worth to mention that this is only a consequence of a road that is being traveled for several years. During Trump's first mandate, of course, he pointed out the journalism, and in his own words, as an enemy of the people. In several press conferences, he expelled journalists out of these rooms in which he offered his conferences just because they were asking questions that control the power and that they exercise their work as journalists. And maybe this model, in some cases, has been extended to the region. In some cases, I've seen to emulate this sort of authoritarian behaviors and to consolidate a model that has been implemented in these authoritarian regimes of the region. It is worth to mention that these sort of models, we are looking at those like in countries like Brazil, where we know that what happened with Bolsonaro and the prosecution that there was to journalists in this country, countries like Argentina, where they humiliate the journalists, they point media, they point journalists, and they put it on the spot countries like El Salvador, where the journalists are being chased, they are intervened and forced to exile in many cases. And here we have to be very careful because this is not something that has to do with an ideology. This doesn't disdain the ideology because we are seeing this in many cases like Venezuela, Nicaragua, just to mention two concrete cases in which this model to criminalize the journalists, to prosecute journalists, it is a strategy, it is an everyday strategy. So we're seeing a danger on how this model keeps extending where diplomacy is broken, where there are no boundaries, and where journalism is daily appointed as a public enemy. And this is looking to generate a weather, an environment in which the information and its integrity is removed, and they want to switch it with propaganda, of course. And this gets worse by these visible relations that happens of Trump with powers of techno millionaires that control platforms of media. And there are concrete cases like Elon Musk, who bought Twitter, turned it into X, and implemented a model in which he deleted the moderation mechanisms of the contents distributed. And what this is looking for is to clear the path under the excuse of the freedom of speech, and so that through these platforms they circulate every sort of misinformation, attacks, and what this does is that it pollutes the information ecosystem. And there's also the announced policies this year by Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, who announcing the dismantling of information verifications programs in which several media from Latin America were allies, that were important, that were independent, and that were allies in this strategy to verify information with Meta. And this program is being said that it's going to be functioning only this year, 2025, and next year it is going to be taken down. So this is also a blow to the budget of many media in the region. So we have to say, because they have developed a certain dependency to this type of funding for technological companies, and this, of course, it means maybe a crisis, maybe a more acute crisis that will force on the layoff of several colleagues in the region, and link with all these powers of techno millionaires. There is a threat that it can be considered as an opportunity by many if it is run appropriately, and this has to do with the development of the accelerated development of AI, who is being developed by these techno millionaires. And although many of us are gaining benefits of AI every day to solve everyday aspects just by using our smartphone, and then we are using this technology, there is a threat, a very important threat, taking into account that AI still we don't see the reach of this technology, that it can also be misused to generate and fuel the misinformation industry, and create more lies to this sort of technology, and a direct threat to technology, to journalism, taking into account that this technology gets information, reads information produced by several journalists in the world without them being rewarded or being credited or any financial compensation by the usage of this information by the means of this type of technology. Most likely in the future, not far away, we will see a very big war of the capital in which China is being a very important player in the development of AI. And until we advance, we're going to be seeing the consequences of the development of this sort of technology, that it is also being developed right now without limits, without ethical boundaries, and without any kind of regulation. This is being done in a very opaque terrain with a lack of transparency, and this, of course, suggests a threat to our society. But of course, the journalism in the region still holds. We are seeing brave examples of colleagues in countries like El Salvador, Nicaragua, Colombia, Mexico, that despite the risks that exercising journalism are, they are still committed with the search of the truth and to present journalism as a public benefit and making where the integrity of the information, where data is important, data is relevant, in which, despite all the difficulties, there is an effort, a very conscious effort to fight against misinformation. Although we sail in a sea of misinformation every day. In this sense, I would like to rescue three basic ideas. And this sort of scenarios where we are right now made us, at least to me, as a part of an organization who boosts on journalism and also dialogues with other sectors of society, it makes me feel questioned on what sort of work are we doing, what strategies are we implementing, what sort of collective constructions in which we are all called. And this is something that I bring home from this encounter. And in this matter, it is also worth the invitation that now that we're talking about journalism, to reflect that the defense of independent journalism is a collective struggle. Not only journalists, directors, editors, rather a collective struggle that allows us to defend this concept of journalism as a public. And a second point has to do with it is related with technology, and technology without ethics and regulation represents a huge threat to society. And out of this, we have to make a common front to boost the discussions regarding the deregularization of technologies in the world. And a third point that has to do with the braveness of journalists, because telling things in a rigorous manner with humanity is still resistance. Many thanks.
Miguel, y gracias por... ¿Sí está? Por el tiempo también, porque les iba a decir que eso va a ser muy importante porque sabemos que estamos aquí en el panel, pero ya nos hemos conocido que somos muchas y muchos periodistas aquí en el grupo y queremos dejar el espacio terminando para abrir un diálogo, no necesariamente de preguntas y respuestas, sino un diálogo para aprovechar la riqueza de la presencia de muchas personas de los medios aquí. Bueno, vamos a seguir con Nicole. Permítame un momentito. Nicole ya lo conocemos, pero aquí tenemos su
Nicole,
bio,
we know it.
sí, su
And here I
biografía.
have his bio.
Y ella
And
es periodista
she's an
independiente,
independent
vive en
journalist and
Santiago de
lives
Chile
in
y
Chile.
trabaja para medios
And she works
internacionales
for
sobre todo
international media,
tipo de conflictos
especially
latinoamericanos.
regarding
Cursó la
Latin American
carrera de
conflicts.
reportera gráfica
She is a
en
graphic
Alpes,
reporter
Escuela de
in
la
Alpes
Imagen,
School of
y la
Image
licenciatura en
and
cine
his bachelor
documental en la
in
Universidad
documentary
Humanismo
films in
Cristiano
the Christian
y tiene
Humanistic
diplomacia
University,
en
and she has
cinematografía
a
y
diploma
dirección de fotografía y cámara
as a
en
cinematographer
cine en
and
la
a director of
prestigiosa
photo
Escuela
in
Internacional
the
de Cine y
prestigious
Televisión
International
de Cuba
School
y Academia
of
de
Cuba.
Cine La Toma en Cuba. Ella está
She's
especializada
specialized
en educación y derechos
in
humanos
education
en
and
la
human
Universidad
rights
de Chile y
for the Chile
actualmente
University,
trabaja freelance en
and she
equipos
works
de
as a freelance
comunicaciones
in
como video
communication teams like
periodista,
video,
productora,
as a video
asesora de
journalist,
prensa
producer,
y
press advisor,
comunicaciones, reportera gráfica,
graphic reporter,
directora de fotografía y
director of
cámara en
photography and camera
películas de cine
in
independiente
movies,
en
in
Chile
independent
y
movies in Chile.
se ha
She's
especializado también
specialized
en la defensa de tierra y
in the
territorio.
defense of land and territory.
Sí, sí, se llama.
Well, first, I would like to say hi. It is a privilege to be here. And here now we have people that are either in jail or in the hospital, or they are being bombed even. So I'm very happy. And talking about challenges, it is a complex subject in Chile right now. We are we are being oppressed. The freedom of press and speech is being oppressed. This has been repressed quickly. The right speech is advancing fast, and the last ranking of Reporters Without Borders, Chile Chile stepped down 17 points in the freedom of speech. We are very worried on what's going on, and I would like to start saying that the bias is out of gender. There is more violence towards women than towards men in the street. To all the people that are doing coverage. A few years back, we had the death of Francisca Sandoval, the first journalist killed in democracy and under the body government, and it was very sad. For she's from a community channel, and she had no insurance. This is precarious. No medicine, no access to social security because we have no contracts, and she was assassinated, by policemen and a drug dealer, and she got shot in the 1st of May protest. And despite all the efforts for justice, there was no conviction of the policemen who were involved in the killing of these journalists. And still to this day, it is a flag of fighting for communal channels, community radio. They're still saying Francisco Sandoval. And I would like to say that from my territorial work and from many partners, because we tend to be on the streets rather than to be writing, but I still do it. That is called pre-production. So I am lucky to have the two careers. So I'm a journalist and I am also a filmmaker. Sadly, there are no support. There are some organizations that may give a real help. One of the latest is the coverage of Julia Chuyil. She's a Mapuche woman who got disappeared. She's gonna be 6 months, and no far right and no media is talking about this because she's an indigenous woman, a poor woman that was threatened by a businessman. The um, so the media responds to its owners, who are businessmen too. So the monopolization of communication in Chile, it is very bad. There is no freedom of speech because this responds to the elite, to the owners. So it is very hard to present this sort of communications. when we went to Julia Chunil to support this family to do a short and brought light on this subject, we were prosecuted, we were intimidated, policemen got there, they take our identities, and it doesn't matter if you have a press ID, they don't care. They don't care. I remember that I spoke to the College of Journalists in Chile, and there is another thing, since you don't have a number of registration, they cannot help you. And 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 the only aid that can do was legal counsel, but the prevention measures there are nothing. So you have to be in jail, you have to be tortured. So to people help you. So it is a big problem that I have shown in so many years in the street for my work is in the communities with social movements against mining, against extraction, and against the militarization of the Mapuche population. I have seen violence up close. I have been in social bursting. This has been a very powerful experience where there were so many people injured that we saw on the streets, so much blood. Many times we had to drop our backpacks and our cameras and bring people to the ER on people with a busted eye. There were over 600 people out of eye trauma in an institutional level. In an institutional level, there were 600, but we believe that it's way more. Many people denounce us. And lastly, the attack is ultimately directed to community press, always, from the policemen, from the institutions. They are the more discriminated in manifestations, in media coverage, in official press coverage, where they will not let you in if you're not on the list, and they see a lot that you are from the main media. And in media, there are many communal media, like Radio Corruf, that transmits everything out of the Mapuche movement. We have the radio, France Radio, that was raided. So we are seeing this prosecution of every media that is daring to do critical or communication, and this is attacking all the freedom of speech, all the freedom of press, and the advance has been few. And I would like to comment for there are many bad things that have happened to us. We have to organize, we have to get together, talk, and the work of a photo reporter or a filmmaker is very lonely. We have had to get together to face these things, and we have had some tactics regarding repression, for instance, in important mobilizations. We have done signal groups to organize ourselves in a coded manner, and of course they can check the data, but this is the fastest and most secure that we found. In regarding threats, what we did is that we began to send our location. I that go out a lot, and I am always in the territories of original land. I do a circuit of people. I leave a link in several spaces so they know where I am. For we don't know. At least I don't trust the police, and none of the independent journalists too. I'm sure about it. And doing this coverage of Julia Chunil, the missing woman, if I don't tell to anyone, you don't know what's going to happen. If they disappear, nobody's going to know what's going to happen. So one of the tactics that we found is that make ourselves visible, use social media and common spaces to say where I was, send our locations in real time. And we have had our cell phones have been tapped. Sometimes you're with somebody with a community, and you hear that somebody's laughing, and it is on the cell phone that is being monitored by the police. They are listening to the conversation. This is too disgusting, but it is being done a lot. They are detaining a lot of people, a lot of women. They are being harassed. When I have been on the street, police, police will tell me things. Police will harass you. So the attacks are more frequent towards women. What happens? There are so many things against us, so they condition that communications has to be very complex, and few communicators actually dare to go to the conflict area, so there is no information. This is restricted. So, for instance, like the Mapuche community, who are fighting for their territory, for the water, against the companies, now they are doing dams. There is people who cannot be there because they are being chased by police or they are being criminalized after the coverage. What has happened to us? Here, my partner is gonna be speaking about strategy, but speaking more on working with social movements. Obviously, it will make you more vulnerable when you exercise. And the last thing is I want to share a work. If in the social burst I was working as a freelance for Al Jazeera, and it was very complex because after 3 months that I never hoped this to happen, but a policeman shot me and I lost the vision of my eye and I had to have some rehabilitation, a very long process. I was able to move forward. So instead of doing a movie of social crisis, I ended up working in an independent filmmaking progress about those who survive ocular trauma, because it is something that's affecting me, and as of today there is no justice, there is no reparation, and there is no justice for journalists nor for the survivors. So it's pretty much that. My job is devoted to the survivors and to the almost 200 journalists killed in Palestine. So I invite you to see this scene.
He pasado por varias prótesis. Bueno, lo primero que tuve que usar fue este, que es transparente, que es un conformador, que fue el que me pusieron después de que me realizaran la evisceración del ojo, cuando ya se decidió que no se podía salvar mi ojo y que la mejor alternativa era sacarlo. En ese momento lo que realizaron fue como vaciar la cavidad y dejar solamente lo que iba a permitir la movilidad, y quedó esto encima para protegerlo.
no vamos a poder devolverle la vista al paciente. Entonces, ¿por qué estamos trabajando en esto? Estamos trabajando en la recuperación de su, no recuperación o rehabilitación de una identidad. Porque cuando tú pierdes el ojo, de alguna u otra forma, es la identidad frente al espejo y frente a tus padres la que se ve fracturada.
Apoyarnos entre nosotros, como no sé, yo tengo certificación en salud mental, yo trabajé harto en psiquiatría, pero eso no significa que yo pueda ayudar a mis compañeros que están pasando lo mismo que yo. Si yo también estoy sufriendo lo mismo, po. Y eso es lo que estamos pidiendo, tampoco estamos pidiendo el mundo, si ellos nos dispararon tienen que hacerse cargo también, po.
Porque, no sé, también yo siento que yo estoy rodeada de mucha gente que me quiere, ¿cachai? Mucha, como que nunca he sentido ausencia de amor o preocupación, cariño por parte de mi círculo, de mi familia, pero tampoco son personas que tienen la herramienta y, o sea, partamos de la base que tú nunca vas a pensar que te van a disparar a la cara, ¿cachai? O que te van a tirar una bomba lacrimógena a la cara y que vaya a perder tu visión, o sea, no sé, mi mamá, mi papá, mi hermano, no, mis amigas, como nadie espera que un día reciba un llamado y como que, oye, pasó esto, ¿cachai? Y me da rabia, mucha rabia, ¿no? O sea, un nivel de rabia que nunca había sentido antes en mi vida, ¿cachai? Y ahí viene el discurso, pues, resentidos, ¿cachai?
Sí, po.
Son unos resentidos. Y claro, ese obviamente viene de un sector que le conviene cambiar la historia, que le conviene mantener una narrativa desde los héroes a los villanos, ¿cachai? Que tampoco garantizan procesos democráticos justos más adelante, ¿cachai? O sea, mira lo que está pasando ahora, como el resurgimiento de la derecha. Como, yo estoy segura que va a salir Cast. Bueno, estoy segura de esa cuestión, que va a salir Cast. Y es por todos estos discursos, pues, ¿cachai? De un giro así dramático, heavy, así como de un momento era como Chile, el país que se unió, que todos queríamos cosas mejores para todos, ¿cachai? Que no queríamos que solamente las cosas fueran justas para algunos, para ahora no, hay que castigar a los que no son como yo, a los que no piensan como yo, ¿cachai? Y se va a repetir la historia una y otra vez, por eso a mí el contexto Chile me agobia.
And the victim of the dictatorship and the victim of the state, so I want to invite you to add on to this project, and I was telling one of my peers and colleagues, this is a picture that's against the state, the administration. Obviously, they're not going to fund me. I'm not going to get any funding from them, So then I'm trying to find support so that we can talk after a while. And at night, we're also going to be over there in the talk shop, and we're going to share another one similar to this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nicole, and thank you for sharing your incredible story and the stories that you documenting along the way, And now it's a privilege to be able to have here on this panel Pavel Vegas, and he's a journalist and a specialized communicator in research on political corruption, democracy, and human rights. Yes, he gives workshops on wording, communication, and disability. Thank you, Pavel, for your time over here. No, thank you. Yes. No, thank you for this wonderful invitation. I thought, what can I possibly contribute to this encounter, And I believe that if we continue with the diagnosis, with the current state of affairs in Guatemala, I think that we're just going to leave depressed and we're never going to get stuck, we're never going to get out of this rut. we're going to be speaking on hope, solidarity, and fellowship, which I believe is really important. And this encounter precisely actually proposes. It proposes that goal. And, I'm really pleased and happy. I am genuinely thankful and impacted by the stories that I've come to know here, by peers and colleagues in different territories in Guatemala, but also from Mexico, from Colombia, from Peru, from Chile, from Nicaragua, and I'm sorry if I left anyone out, Argentina. Well, I'm not sure. Oh, Brazil, of course, Brazil. And I believe that that's what we need to focus on. Yesterday, we're talking about the threats, but also on this self-criticism of our own spaces. In my case, from the media and media corporations, and even from journalism, from exercising, even from independent journalism that we carry out. So then, since I like being concise, I jotted down 6 important points, which I believe, based on my own experience and based on my own knowledge base and development and track record in journalism, and also based on everything that's transpired here in Guatemala, as well as the trajectory and experience amongst attacks, coups, assaults and blockades. And I'm also nourished and feed off the experiences that you all have shared, between Monday, yesterday, and today. So then the first point that I want to share is we need to overcome those petty divisions in the journalistic guild, in media and the communication. Why? Because these fractures are the ones that actually nourish the mafia. They nourish powers and totalitarianisms. These fractures are precisely the cracks where they find their paths, their roadmaps to appropriate the narrative and their own truth, and not the realities and truths of territories and vulnerable communities. So then I believe that this encounter, for example, this one is a space where we've been able to exchange data and exchange experiences, that we are set on building a profitable Latin American, inter-American dialogue and exchange to build precisely those alliances amongst nations, and that we need to replicate, yes, in our own guilds, in our own national guilds. I firmly believe that Guatemala has known how to understand gradually, step by step, little by little, this dire need of grouping ourselves as a guild. For example, in 2020, we built, what is now as a collective known as They Will Not Silence Us. We will not be silenced, which was brought together due to the experiences that back then, through the tool of the pandemic and confinements, they ensured the censure of the mass media and independent journalism as a whole. They shut down press conferences, they shut down information, it was blocked entirely, even any intention of trying to democratize information, mass media, and journalism through Alejandro Yamatei's administration, the previous presidential administration. So that we concluded in the need, because of the same juncture, of coming together, first of all, as a WhatsApp group, and now a Signal and Telegram group. We varied people have stepped out because of being in discrepancies and whatnot. There are other people that have joined us, and we've understood the importance of relating with other experiences, with other situations throughout the territory, not just in the capital city, although it's an urban and a city movement, but I think that we're moving step by step, gradually understanding the regrouping, which is pressing, vital, and urgent for journalism and independent communication. Yes. On the other hand, I also believe that it's important and also very necessary training. For example, I highlighted in the F group that we were sharing with Maria Jacinta, with Sylvia, and with Dalia, I'm not sure what was your name again? Oh, and my brother from Petén, I forgot his name, I'm sorry, my brother from Petén. And we were talking precisely about For example, I was stressing the importance of training, not only from the point of view of journalism and the press, to follow these certain formats, which the basic principles of journalism isn't about neutrality, impartiality, or objectivity. I don't believe in objectivity. I don't believe that objectivity can actually be a guiding light, but the opposite. But I deem that the principle should be rigor, grit, and veracity. Yes, truthfulness beyond each one's truth, but the veracity of being able to share precisely what we're exploring and not make up things, okay? So then this training beyond journalism as such, and journalistic principles and ethical communication as well, but to be based on the code of ethics is basing ourselves is foundational, and to highlight and stress this within our own spaces. For example, I've built my own code of ethics to say that it's based on experiences that I've gone through, through certain media of code of ethics. That, there's an experience that served a whole lot with two of my peers, Enrique Navera and Wolfgang Ochaeta, who were and are respectively in public squares and independent communications in Guatemala. And that's how I designed my own code of ethics based on other codes of ethics that have been operated in, because they're dilemmas, it's not rigid, but it's open. But beyond journalism and journalism formation, I believe that we need to be trained and equipped in additional disciplines and additional knowledge bases or learnings. Yes, for example, historic knowledge, and the alternative historic knowledge is the need to deep into philosophy and philosophical dilemmas, thinkers, both male and female, as well as additional disciplines to be able to ensure that our own journalistic experiences, our own research, our own pieces, our own communication pieces might have a solid foundation to have a much more impactful effect. On the other hand, I deem that from this point of view, it's a diagnosis which I perceive, there's a disconnect, yes? I'm not saying of every person, but there's an obvious disconnect in the guild of the needs and realities of our communities, of our regions, territories, and vulnerable groups of society as a whole. What are those dire needs of communication? What is that link that I'm supposed to have as a journalist with a community? And I'm not going to talk about other regions in the nation, but even with my own capital city, what should be my connection with those people that are in dire need of a timely and precise information, but that I'm void on really knowing what are their interests? So I believe that there's a pressing and urgent need to transit towards much more accessible formats, and this is point number 4. We have to shift towards or evolve into much more accessible formats that can transcend a journalistic piece and that can support us in these formats to be able to reach and to cause the effect, the desired effect in the population. There are two ways, one that's going up, on the decision makers. I believe that this analysis, data, pieces, and research is very important to be able to reach the decision makers going up or those around them. But in addition, to ensure that information reaches people themselves at large. For example, I think that it's a very important challenge, to say the least, for these formats that we truthfully employ them. Because if I write a piece, I was speaking on this and with an encounter of several colleagues and peers, what's the point of writing a piece of text, a 5,000 word piece, if no one's going to read it? And if it's not going to generate an impact, what is the point of it? It's an effort in futility. Or what is the point of explaining my subjects in Spanish if Mayan communities aren't going to understand me, aren't going to understand what I portray, analyze, or disseminate. So then what's the point of addressing a relevant subject because it's of the political elite or national corruption or decisions made on a national spectrum if territories could care less about this information? I want to submit two examples that I've experienced. For example, 12 months ago, I wrote a journalistic piece basically on supervision, which I believe that was necessary, on how Congress invests public funds in the purchase of furniture for congressmen and congresswomen. But I focus mostly on that monitoring and tracking of these purchases, especially in a chair, a simple chair, purchased by Congress for a congressman from the region of Taruleo, a region in the southwestern part of our country. And that chair had a cost of $9,500, had a price tag of $1,200. It's an unnecessary expense, it's an anomaly. Besides this, it helped me recognize the business that it sold it to and how that business had also been favored with additional contracts. And it's those and purchases which actually become an enormous corruption, but that's under the radar, it's silenced, it's muted. And it didn't have that much impact, that particular piece. But a person from Retaluleo, from that region, spoke to me and told me that that particular piece had been not a scandal per se, but it had been shared and impacting much within the region itself of Retaluleo. So then I got to thinking on the importance of being able to take this information. And yesterday we talked about this with Mario and with Manuela, I believe, about how it's vital to take this information to these regions and territories, but also to understand what information is emerging there, to have information reciprocity, to engage in this. And another example, which I believe is very teachable. I saw a tweet last week concerning a program sponsored by the state, and the government in certain regions, prioritized regions of social aid. But I wrote that was the perfect metaphor for the nation. Why? Because what this program does is that it changes the lands of thousands of homes with dirt grounds, and they pour in cement floors as well as additional benefits, etc. But I find this so impactful that there are so many thousands of homes with dirt floors, So that's the metaphor of the nation. How can we build a different state if the country has a dirt floor that doesn't correspond, that's inadequate, or that the final conclusion of it is inequality, sickness, malnutrition, and death, in the end. And so then I wrote the word metaphor, and someone responded to that tweet, and I chuckled over it, to be honest, and then I noticed that perhaps they're actually right. They might have a point. And I said, why do you use the term metaphor? People don't understand it. Don't be using terms. And he gave me an example of a news anchor. Please tell me when it's time. Please make sure you tell me, right? Make sure you yell at me. Don't do signals like. But I kept that reflection. For example, the word metaphor isn't really a very difficult word, but it might be for other people. And I'm not understanding that language. It's not about going down to that level, but we do have to explain it in a much more effective manner. I share these two examples, but then also, I also want to speak of that reconnection that we need to have with our people, communities, and land. Because I wasn't informed, or many people aren't aware of this, of the 600 individuals with optical trauma in Chile that she shared. Were also not informed or unaware of the genocide that's being lived in the Amazons, because of the gasoline companies over there, or the region of Michoacan that's resisting, the narco dealers' traffic there, or of the whispers going throughout the capital city that Flor shared in Antigua, Guatemala. All these different stories birthed in the communities and regions that are in dispute. Maria Camila as well, shares concerning the struggles, the social struggles in Colombia, and those urban networks that have also been paralyzed because there's a progressive government, close quotes, that precisely causing social movements, social struggles, to embolden, or they just dissipate altogether, So I believe that journalism, just to go back to our core idea, needs to return to its essence, which is a public service, a social service beyond the financing and funding, which I also believe is an opportunity to go back to our territories again, for people to appropriate journalism as theirs, to do so professionally through microfunding, a network of funding, so that that figure of journalism actually means something to the population, because they're so disconnected concerning the importance of journalism and how journalism actually affects the reality of vulnerable populations. Out of earshot, I'm sorry, I won't be able to. Yes, we're going to leave it there to be able to make room for questions. But thank you so much for these very valid and concrete points concerning, what the status is. No, but there's still more to go. Thank you. Thank you. No, thank you. And now it's a privilege to be able to hand the word to Angela Cook. Angela Cook has a degree in social work, studying, communications and information, Cachiquel, leader and coordinator of Indigenous American Network in the Latin American Association of Public Education, a network that many know. I read her work in documentary, photography, and radio focuses on revealing the struggles and resistance of Indigenous people, addressing subjects such as racism, patriarchy, and structural violence, while simultaneously highlighting the transformational, transformative proposal. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, yes. And fortunately, together with Pavel, we had to speak on the responses that we provide for all of these crises. And this could be something hopeful, something that has worked for us, But I broke up this space into 3 moments, that it's necessary to speak briefly of Guatemala's context. And I'm not going to address it too extensively, but Guatemala is going through a deep crisis. And perhaps, the nearest event was the hindering the transition of power with the current president. And there are other criminalizations such as Pacheco and Hector, which we're currently experiencing right now. State institutions, especially the justice system, have been co-opted, and that's not a lie for anyone. And this has been through corrupt political and financial networks seeking impunity here in this nation, which has been historical. This co-option doesn't seek to embrace political power and to control democracy or who's exercising democracy, but also to silence voices. And this is precisely where we find the importance for journalism. Communicators, both male and female, also play a vital role in what they're informing, but also what guarantees are they also providing to ensure that they all can exercise a fearless and bold journalism. The effort to silence voices, critical voices, and to remove strategic actors and stakeholders. And this includes journalists, communicators, anchors, community leaders, peasants, and defenders of human rights as well. Criminalization towards the journalistic exercise has been latent. It's nothing new. Yesterday we did a critical time. How it doesn't matter who it is, what family they come from, and my status, economic and social status as well. So then community journalists, especially indigenous of Aboriginal people, especially women, they face additional risky conditions whenever they share communication, because they do it from their region. In other words, they're actually right there in the community, so that I'm fighting against the mayor. I see them every day. We go to the market, I can run into the mayor. And if I go to the butcher shop, I might run into the mayor. So they face additional risks and situation. Criminalization occurs directly, there are threats, criminal allegations as well, but it also helps indirect. It also happens indirectly. For example, they limit access to information, exclusion of this information also, not only because there's a monopoly of the radio electric spectrum, but also a monopoly in which language we employ in mass media. In other words, here, every single thing, starting from channels, a monopoly, or information monopoly has to be in Spanish, avoiding the existence of other national languages in Guatemala. Cases such as Jose Ruben Zamora. And I mention him because this is the one that likely everyone's aware of, or the one that we've heard of more right now. But there are also additional cases which are invisible because they're in a rural context or a community context, such as the case of the raid and persecution of communicators of the community radio station, the Kekchi, the radio station Kakachapa. We don't hear that much about it because there's not media coverage, because it's in the community, it's local and directed many times by women as well. So how we can also reanalyze, how we can provide visibility to the struggles of journalists. And the criminalization is directly linked with the defense of the territory, because many indigenous journalists, they're documenting the struggle for water, the struggle for land against mega projects or social corruption, and they're putting a face to this corruption, because corruption not only to be taken as something that's managed in Congress, but it's also something to say, why isn't there any medicine in clinics and centers? Why do we get food midway into the school year? Whenever we apply a face to corruption, we can defend for right and we can also denounce it. Yes, there are certain implications that I jotted down, for example, the erosion to collective right to true information, or the narratives of people. And in addition, what is necessary, especially in communities historically excluded, to ensure that this information reaches them, because no one can stand up or no one can fight for a struggle that they aren't aware of. And it's not necessarily that we're the people of Aborigines and to lack the capacity to understand, or that they do not have the intelligence, but the state itself has played a pivotal role in hiding information, neglecting information. And this is a thin line, between not sharing what's taking place and also hiding what's happening in territories, or how state corruption affects them directly over there. So whenever we avoid showing what's affecting them over there, we no longer fight because we believe that we're excluded or we're an exception to the. They also restrict civic spaces, we weaken the community fabric, thereby debilitating access to information, symbolic violence takes place in racism, the denial of the voice of women in mass media. And this is also really important to highlight that community communication is very important, that it's paved a path that has allowed us for us to be able to be here on the stage. But it's not only about speaking of community mass media, but also where are women represented within these media realms. And also to speak a little bit more about the importance of mass media, in the community, but also to show justice that takes place within this media and communication. Censure and fear leads to self-censure, and self-censure has been a historic issue, because if they're silencing one, then out of fear of this, out of fear of persecution, of stigmatizing, that affects me directly and my home, my family as well, I'm not going to want to be able to make them vulnerable, so I'm going to remain silent in the process. So then this leads to a rupture, of collective processes that are also managed and coupled with the media and the communities and organizations that stem from those regions as well. But there are certain strategies that has worked for us, while exercising our journalistic responsibilities, that we have to respond also to this, seeing the corruption of the state, which everyone has addressed over here, the criminalization and structural racism. For us, it's always going to be foundational to speak of structural racism. Why? Because this is one of the structures that have also been invisible in people. For example, we don't speak of it from pity or victimization, but from a territory of dignity in which we also build additional transformative proposals. So then indigenous people, we haven't always ever as expected to be saved, although it's a responsibility of the state. to provide swift responses to issues affecting us. It's never done so that we ourselves have created our own communication strategies to stand up for life, territory, and especially the truth. Why? Because if there's something really important, just like Pavel stated, for example, there is an association of Guatemalan journalists, but if I'm not an active collegiate or I'm not academically a member, I can't become a member. Many of us aren't aware of this association, so this delimits, the rights that we should stand up for and be defended and to be acknowledged as official journalists. These strategies are not only a document also, but they also have root, body, and a territory, because we are the ones that are also included within, and they deviate from the focus on objectivity and neutrality. For us, that's a fallacy, It's still something that actually hasn't worked, neutrality, so we don't really bet on it, and they position themselves from a much more political and community view with the face, because we are the ones in our own language and indigenous garb, Now I'm going to go on to explain why do I mention the indigenous garb. And this is precisely where we affirm and we understand that communication isn't just a process that we're taught in college, but it's beyond, it's the daily contact that we all have with our communities, with the people that we see, the stories that we hear, the stories that also have been left also at an oral level, and to a certain degree, this has also harmed the collective history of the nation as a whole. How to understand this collective history that's being managed through daily contact has played a vital role to be able to have other means of communication. Anti-racist communication. Why do we stand to this? Because we believe that unless we question the racism, as we question capitalism, patriarchies, and other oppressive systems, it's going to be much more hard-pressed to make significant developments in democracy that can include each and every one of us. So we have to question it from that angle as well. And in this, perhaps, the first responses that we found is to be able to recover and underpin our own narratives, because therein we don't decide to create new narratives. There are already narratives that need to be underpinned and strengthened. And a little bit of this to contradict the hegemonic discourse that mass media are the voice of the people, that mass media are the face of the people, just in case we might be the bearers or the channels to amplify communities, but they will never be. We aren't the voice, we aren't the face. Why? Because we're not aware if we're even legitimate to be able to do so. And in this, indigenous communication not only denounces the injustices, but we also affirm our own worldviews, our own ways of life, and the joy as a political writer. For us, this is foundation, and this is why I want to bring the words of Nana Lorena Carnal, who always says, to recover joy without losing indignation, okay? So then we also communicate and we stand up for joy as a political right that also corresponds to us. And perhaps a simple daily example of this is whenever one of us, are sharing a story from their community, they do it in their own native language, and this has a political impact as well, naming the territory, how our elders refer to it. For example, whenever we're in Santiago Atitlan, they say, in their own native language, and she does so in their own native language, thinking high, just as they were officially named, and this also causes a political impact for all of us. So then, we're not just a neutral witness of everything transpiring in the community, but we ourselves are part of it. And this is where we affirm that journalists, we can be activists. We reaffirm ourselves there because we're part of what's actually taking place in the moment. We can be activists. Second is to inform from and for communities, not to extract information from the communities, to provide my own spin, my own angle on how I believe this might be affecting the communities. I could, suppose this, but there's a premise that we employ that we don't reproduce the agenda of the legacy media. They have their own agendas and we're well established. We don't want to comply with that, but what we do place in the center is the word, but that word stated by people from their own narratives in their own communities. Even with legacy media, try to find mechanism to silence them, so we do so in the Mayan language. And this is really important because everything that sounds in the great media corporations is stated in Spanish. And a clear example of this is that, protests, for example, they many times interviewed people who spoke in Mayan language, and they were interviewed by a reporter in Spanish. So then that barrier, that linguistic barrier also hinders and keeps misinformation circulating. For example, say they didn't let cars go by with food, ambulances, and everything. So then the fact of having a reporter, an anchor, to speak in the same language causes information to be able to flow in a much smoother manner. And you feel much more confident in both to be able to speak in your own language. Yes, linguistic justice. So then providing communication in the Mayan language, for us, has been the genesis of our work. To speak our languages on air for us has been a political decision, not only to underpin the interculturality in Guatemala, but also as a political decision, and also an act of justice and of reivindication for our own languages. Why? Because in Guatemala, there's a law of national languages, but that's just left right there, shelved, and it's not in practice. And so a country where racism is expressed by speaking our language, we're speaking Cachiquel, Mam, Quechua, or any other Mayan language, Xinhua or Garifuna, to speak it in our radio stations, platforms such as TikTok and others. For us, this continues to be an act of disobeying the system, which strives for us to speak what they want us, or what the state wants us to say, yes? So then it's trying to find, historically, seeking to silence us. And so I'd like to just state this, speaking our own languages on radio station or in any media space for us has been a political decision and an act of linguistic justice, especially when it comes to reivindication. And the fourth, and I'm almost done over here, just bear with me, networks of care and protection, something that has really helped us, for example, CFEGER, which is the means that they support two networks, understanding that we don't need necessarily take journalists that can go bring stories, but we can underpin them, the ones that are already there, because they are the ones that are actually defending water, defending life on a daily basis. They're placing their own very own bodies in defense. So create two networks, the Mayacat network, and herein also just to state or to counteract the discourse that we need to know precisely what happens in the city, but when will the city be informed of what's taking place in the rest of the territory, in the land? So what reporters do over here, both mainly in the field, to share their note or their piece in Mayan language, and if they feel comfortable, then they can translate into Spanish, but mainly they share it in the Mayan language. And for example, they're located in Santiago Titlan, in Hocotan, in Poptun, in all these different regions. It's a network of journalists that are spread out throughout the entire nation. And the network of UNAV communicators and journalists, because they have different narratives. They're built on, or they're strengthened based on the involvement of women, so there we have other discourses and how we understand women's engagement, and journalistic exercise that are connected with other things that we need to do. Many are mothers, many are activists, midwives, and but they also understand communication from their own daily roles, yes? And the fifth piece is that, to develop training methodologies, which I coincide so much with Pavel, but for these methodologies, these training and equipping methodologies can be viewed from our own realities, from everything that we can learn, from everything that we need to understand and embrace. In other words, that training shouldn't be imposed from the outside, externally, just on what we're taught, such as methodologies and such, but they're built based on the community experiences and those experiences that have operated and worked in other processes that can adapt precisely for our communication processes, understood from those that are managed from the collective whole. This is really important for us to develop information methodologies and training methodologies, and we do so, but also bearing in mind additional experiences, yes? And here, in our training processes, we found two main paths, right? To underpin, technically, I know what media to use for Twitter, what means to use for Instagram and Facebook, but I'm also aware what political content do I want to include within those pieces, or what I'm actually stating in the radio. I know how to operate a radio. I can use my console. It's not that I'm technically savvy, but what discourse am I actually managing in everything that I'm sharing? And then afterwards, and I promise that I'm going to end with this, how to reivindicate our daily activities as political act. We say that the daily conveys and builds. So when an indigenous woman is actually leading a program, sharing her piece and anchor, sharing a TikTok in her own language, using her native clothing, she's bringing a rupture from ages and centuries of exclusion, because we haven't had the presence of indigenous women who are sharing their pieces, especially in their own Mayan language, so that the rupture of those centuries of exclusion, when our peers are speaking with their own native language, it's really important for us. Why? Because it's also a way of making privilege that information should be seen from a different angle, from a legitimate way, and that legitimacy needs to be provided by our own people and our own communities. So for us to be able to recover the media spaces which are as legitimately ours and to position ourselves in the political stance and our different ways of dressing, our different ways of speaking, our different ways also of believing in the community as a whole. So then to conclude, I think this communication, anti-racist community, and indigenous anti-racist strategies. This is just response to a democratic crisis, because this democratic crisis for us, it didn't just appear out of nowhere right now, but it's persisted throughout long periods of time. But this is kind of like those seeds or those kernels of corn that's going to yield fruit at one time or another, and they form other possible types of life which are very necessary. And then we find dignity, we find joy, we find memory, justice, and there's a present, but there's also a future, because when facing fear, we haven't responded with silence, but we responded with living words, from our people, living words from that we say this like this in plural, because these are words. And in light of the silence imposed by us, we continue reaffirming that there's nothing with us, nothing without our female communicators and our Mayan communicators, our Mayan female journalists, from our racialized or indigenous people. All right, and that's it. Okay, thank you. Yes. Okay. All right, big round of applause. Thank you. Another big round of applause for all of them, please. Wonderful work, very complete. Because, as a joint effort, they provided an excellent basis to open dialogues and exchanges on the role of journalism, as well as what we have seen is that there is no separation between defensive activism that we carry out and the journalism that we are providing. So then there's a lot of indicators, and unfortunately, these are some of the attacks that we receive, that we ignore, that we suffer.
Comunicadoras en la Red Nacional de Defensoras de Derechos Humanos en México, por ejemplo, ahora en los últimos 2-3 años, por primera vez, el primer grupo en el registro de agresiones, incluso en México, lamentablemente muchos asesinatos, somos periodistas. Eso es algo que está cambiando y que está estrechamente vinculado al autoritarismo que estamos viendo en nuestros países. Entonces, sin más, vamos a abrir a las preguntas y comentarios. Vamos, Milena y Raúl. Y el señor aquí enfrente, por favor.
And this gentleman over here, right up front. Thank you.
Oiga, y después, después hacemos otra ronda, pero
then we're going to do another round, but let's just proceed with these three for now. Yes? Hello, thank you very much. Thank you for everything that you shared. Everything resonates with me. I'm from Argentina and I work for a media known as, Agencia Presente, present agent, which is a means. We have an office located in Argentina and another in Mexico, and we labor with journalism focusing on human rights, especially to be able to cover the region of LGBTQ populations and Aboriginal populations, indigenous people, and migrant populations, as well as others. Yes? You get the gist of it. This is our role, and yes, we're actually at a very critical moment. We believe that our journalism, we've been able to achieve. There are several things that I would like to stress or highlight over here. And there's a question that I would also like, and I believe that we should continue discussing this, at a much deeper level, perhaps during the workshops later today. For example, we spend a lot of time combating a little bit of everything that's been said right now, which is misinformation. We created a unit of data verification precisely to respond to this misinformation. For example, President Milei said, all of these points, all the gays are pedophiles. That's what they say. All gays are pedophiles. So we have to respond to this. We can't just leave this in limbo, or that trans women can't really compete in the Olympic Games, and we step out to share why, yes, why the blockers of testosterone and many different things, okay? In reality, it's exactly because we shouldn't be having to do this, and so we ask ourselves, do we really need to do this or not, And each day, the demand of consumption information responds to the resources provided by independent means of communication. So we believe that we are at a critical junction, at a critical point right now. And personally speaking, in certain strategies that we're opting for, to be able to speak on these subjects, against authoritarianism and against, the ultra right that's moving forward and advancing. We're thinking over here, precisely like up here, it says, no, it's not about new narratives, but the narratives that are also established, sharing new stories and finding new reference points. There's dignity in communication, in traditional communication, that one person speaks, there's like a wavelength with a message that's charged and an ear that's hearing. I think we're trying to revert that, starting with the ear that's hearing, that represents a person that's constituted by an idiosyncrasy, by an identity, and several other factors. How can we speak to this person, So kind of like to invert the traditional means of communication, starting with who are we speaking to and what do we want to share with them and who's that individual and how we're actually going to share this. And then we have social media and the metaphors that Pavel mentioned. I think that it's good to be able to share metaphors, I believe there are many people to speak on democracy, and we add the word term democracy, they're not going to understand. When we speak about family tables, they are going to understand and embrace it, Or perhaps it's a metaphor. Perhaps we don't have to say the word metaphor itself, but I believe that we need to articulate and word it and aim towards that is family narratives, household narratives, and how to be able to be much more effective. And one of the questions that I would like to shoot out, because I have several, but one of them, I got really excited. As you can see, I got really riled up. Concerning social networks, okay? Precisely. It's a query, a question that I ask, is it good for us to leave Twitter or X or Facebook and to build kind of like other networks and to start building them from scratch? Or should we remain in those spaces, which in the end is the ultra right, they respond and the right own it, They own it and fight from those spaces, and how to get and use those spaces. This is a question that I'm asking because as the media, we ask ourselves, what should we do?
It was a great panel. I want to center more than in journalism towards the journalist, and I have 4 brief things. First is that the journalists that are committed towards alternate and critical information, we cannot aspire to live out of journalism. I have been 40 years in this, and it is fine to have an income, but we cannot make the work dependable on the money that we receive. For if we put the money up front, afterwards we're going to have problems. Secondly, we shouldn't aspire to be massive. If massiveness comes, great, but it is very erratic. It comes and goes. We have to be rigorous, we have to be truthful, and we have to be committed. Being massive doesn't depend on us. It depends on things that we don't control, but work great done, yes. And thirdly, Mexico, a democratic country ruled by progressivism, Trump is horrible, Milei too. But the country where most journalists are killed in Latin America today is Mexico. With the quality that the power looks the other way, it justifies it, it doesn't take care. And the former president, Obrador, got tired of pointing out journalists with his finger because he didn't like what they were saying. So we have to have the value to attack enemies, but also those who are dressing out of being from the left or progressives, and they are even worse. And according to neurobiologists, mind doesn't think on information, it thinks on ideas. So our journalism gotta have an input of ideas, because we have to thread information in ideas. And this is why they flood us with information. Information itself doesn't work. The capacity to contribute with ideas, for we owe to our people below us. So we shouldn't limit to put information there. Many thanks. I am Mauricio Beltran out of the Colombian Confederation of Media, and thanks for everything that you give us. And I want to say something. The work from our journalist profession, and this has related with a common pain, which is something that Juan Pablo was talking yesterday. And this is the third point that he highlighted, is propaganda, is that we stop doing journalism to do propaganda. And this has been common for every country, all the way from the States, all the way to Argentina or Brazil. We have to take the means, the media. We have fought for the land, but we haven't fought for the radio electrical spectrum, and this spectrum must be in our fight. In Colombia, we have the right to found mass media, but we got restricted. You got 33% in Uruguay, you got 33% in Ecuador, but we need that electro spectrum is accompanied by financing to do decent journalism will be enough for for we are seeing a moment of the degradation. And remember, the media is a system, and there are no media that's beyond or in the back. This is not social media against journalism. We need television and radio for the communities, and we need social media. And the question that the Argentinian is doing, be careful. The ceiling that they're putting to us on the social media is only gonna flow towards people that's close to us. Either we create more networks to go to another populations. We cannot do journalism or media for those who are convinced. We need to do it to do a different society. And social media today is done to put a ceiling on us. And your post will not reach the 1,000 people. It will reach a small population, and it will reach a small population if you pay them. And how can we advance into democracy if we have that ceiling? Creating networks is important. So we learned that we have to go from journalism towards communication, because working with social organization isn't enough to produce information. We have to enter in the fight for the symbols. We have to be strong. We have to go into the cultural fight. What neuroscience says is that we think in a way that it is not meant in ideas. This is fundamental. We think out of association, out of symbols. We need to boost after symbols, the symbols against patriarchy, and the working processes with communal organizations that are producing the contents. Only the mobilization will allow us these contents, and with a communication strategy that will go from the dialogues, from these elements, all the way to public element, all the way to public events. Just an example, in Tomaco we have communal radio, we have a museum, and we have a festival, and we have a defense of the black women in Colombia. So we have to traverse all this road. Many thanks. So we have seen several hands, and this is good. But we're going to ask you to
breves
be more
las
brief
intervenciones
on
porque
the
también
interventions
tenemos la hora del
we
almuerzo.
also have lunch. Many thanks. Sorry, I just want to make a question, and it may be a tad sensible, but first I want to congratulate you and congratulate all these journalists who investigate, and there are several of them here. And I want to make a question, and I don't want to be misinterpreted, and this is based on a personal happening. How do we do with media? And I'm going to talk about the territory where I am. There was a person a while ago, he went ahead and created a page, he created a TikTok, he reached 70,000, and now he's a journalist. And I'm going to correlate these last two interventions done here. And when we have that here, the territory takes advantage to say you have to pay to me in order not to misinform. it doesn't matter if you're doing a good work. If you don't pay me, and I denounce something here, and he's like a pseudo journalist, and he says, I have been here 7 years, and he told me, everybody support me with money each month. I don't know if you're going to be doing the same. And I say, well, I think that communication must be quoted to see what can you do for us and how can we receive it. However, there are no quotings because this is not a formal media. You cannot live out of this, but there is a social responsibility in this. And he told me, well, we're gonna have to speak ill of you. It's like, how can we do to strengthen these journalist images towards the local? And so it is known that it should be from a professional environment. I don't know if I explained myself correctly, but that's the question right there. Well, we're going to have a last one, and we're going to close this round. Hello, hello. Well, I am here. To your left, to your right. You're here. Sorry, I'm a tad ill. I cannot stand up. First, I want to thank you for all the information that you have given to us. I am Peruvian, and I will love to hear what you were mentioning, that you mentioned my country into the affected countries, and you haven't. I felt that bit invisible, but this is why I would like to comment on how are we living. We are living in an authoritarian regime where Dina Boluarte is on the head, and since she got in, the journalism has been greatly affected. From 2023, there were like 230 attacks against journalists who were covering the protests, and recently the National Association of Periodists of Journalists of Peru, he says that there are over 100 attacks towards people who work on the press. So we are not just defending ourselves against the police, towards the workers of the press. Now there are criminal organizations that are beginning to kill journalists in our country. And what we don't want, and this may not be a good example, but we don't want to be Mexico, for we know what happens, and we know that there are several journalists that are being attacked by criminal organizations, and that's on one side. Secondly, Congress promoted gagging laws, and there are ideas to cut the freedom of speech in my country. And Dina Boluarte, in the presidency, she says, and she actually writes these journalists who question her, who pose questions against her. And this is something that we have been living, and this has been affecting us a lot. And she's qualifying our work when we criticize the regime as well as what we are doing is image terrorism. As I was saying, now we don't have to be careful against the police through Boluarte to shut down the journalists, but also from the Congress and criminal organizations. And then you have the facade media, this pro-official media, this pro-enterprise media, to utilize these spaces that they have. This alternate press, and they question, and so we have this uncertainty because we know that we are working for the people, but then we hit this wall that call themselves alternate media, but they are a facade media, and they speak ill of us. And this is discouraging for many youngsters who devote to journalism, but we understand that we are part of the people. We are people from the street, we are people from the cone, as we call it, and we have make ourselves professional to avoid having more spaces that criminalize our own people. And this is why we think that it is very important to insist in the democratization of information, you mentioned this, just we need to empower the users to make informed decisions. We are close to start electoral campaigns next year, and we think that this is not possible if people don't have access to technology, because most of the alternate media and independent media, we need these platforms. And if we have this gap of technology, how are we going to be able to divulge this information? And lastly, I agree on what he's saying, to be they have long working hours, they don't have the time to be informed, and that's something that we are living every day to get to them. Many thanks. I tried to summarize everything.
No, pues qué bueno que hay ese nivel de interés y que podemos seguir platicando, pero ahora tenemos que ir a almorzar. Y también, sí, busca a la gente con las preguntas que quedaron, y también
look for the people that have remaining questions, and we have some other spaces
sobre medios y para seguir
about
platicando.
media.
Entonces,
And
con esto cerramos
with
esta
this, we're
mesa
going to be
otra vez,
closing this table
agradeciendo
again. I
a
am
las
thankful
personas que han
towards
presentado
all of
sus
you that presented their
experiencias y sus
experiences and
conocimientos,
their
y también a
knowledge,
todos
and
ustedes
to
por
each
la
of you for
participación.
participating.
Y ahí seguimos.
And we'll keep up.
Sí.
No se me vayan todavía.
Please don't leave
¿Me
just
escuchan?
yet. Can you hear me?
Bueno, agradecer
Well,
mucho a todas las
we
personas
are
aquí en el
thankful
escenario. Solo quiero
to everyone here on
reconocer.
stage. I
¿Me
just
escuchan?
want to
Sí.
recognize. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Hay dos periodistas
There are
independientes
two
que no
independent
pudieron estar
journalists
hoy
who
con
couldn't be
nosotros.
here today
Uno
with
por
us.
temas logísticos,
One out of
pero
logistics,
Mike Fox,
but then
y el
Mike
otro
Fox,
Manuel Ortiz,
and then
compañero de
Manuel
México,
Ortiz
que
from Mexico,
radica en Estados
who
Unidos
lives
y
in
no
the
pudo
States
venir
and
justamente
couldn't
por la
come
represión
because of the
que se está
repression
viviendo
that it
contra el
is
periodismo
living
independiente en Estados
against
Unidos, pero
independent media in the States.
sin ellos no hubiera habido
But
mesa de
without them,
medios,
we wouldn't have
no hubiera habido
a
sí, realmente
media table.
consideración
There
al
wouldn't
tema de
be
comunicaciones en este
any
evento, y han
looking
estado
into the
trabajando muy
comms
duro
part in this
en los
event,
últimos
and
4
they have
meses.
been working
No
hard
sé
for
si están
these
viendo
last
la
4
transmisión en
months.
vivo,
I don't
pero
know if they
darles un
can see
aplauso
this
también a los
live,
compañeros.
but we really want to give a big round of applause to them, please.